I'll talk a little bit in Italian and then in English and then translate. Ok, facciamo qualche passaggio dall'italiano all'inglese per semplificare un po' la possibilità di seguire la conversazione. Intanto buonasera e benvenuti. I'm saying just welcome to everybody. Questa sera parliamo di questo libro che vedete qui davanti, La Tempesta Perfetta, Acqua, Cibo e 8 miliardi di consumatori. So, we just said the title and we're here talking with Olof Lundqvist, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Okay. Thank you, perfect. He's a senior advisor at the Stockholm Water Institute. Lui è un senior advisor, questo si capisce credo anche in italiano, dell'Istituto sull'Acqua di Stoccolma. You also created an academic course on water studies in Stockholm, is that correct? You created like the water studies, the academic course on water studies in Stockholm?
Not in Stockholm, that's in another
Okay.
town, about 200 kilometers south of Stockholm.
Okay. Yes, we have to use the microphone for the ones that are following us in streaming. Dicevamo che precisava che ha contribuito a creare il corso proprio sugli studi dell'acqua in una università che però non è precisamente a Stoccolma ma nell'area. Ma arriviamo direi ai temi. Uno dei temi, intanto lo dico in italiano e poi passo a tradurlo in inglese, uno dei temi principali da cui potremmo partire è un tema di pura attualità. Banalmente vediamo che ci sono contemporaneamente lunghissimi periodi di siccità o addirittura siccità in alcune parti del nostro paese e nel frattempo alluvioni che invece colpiscono prepotentemente altre zone del paese. Questo, ripeto, addirittura in contemporanea oppure una condizione segue l'altra. Cerchiamo di capire con lui come mai questa sembra essere la nostra nuova normalità. Okay, so the first question, we see two different types of events in our country too, in Italy too, but I think also in other countries, droughts followed by floodings, or maybe droughts in some parts of the country and floodings in others. So is this a new kind of normal that we have to know and understand and handle in some way, or is it something that will change over time again? What's the situation?
Is it on now? Yeah. First, thank you very, very much for inviting me here. Antonio, we have known each other for 10 years. Gaia only
10 minutes.
10 minutes, but it's a very good 10 minutes. Quality is high for that meeting. Thank you very much for your question. I think it's a very good start. And yes, I could tell you that this morning we left Sweden last Saturday. And then in the south of Sweden it was springtime. It was about 10 degrees centigrades, but we could feel the spring in the air, so to speak. This morning or yesterday, we heard that it was heavy snowfall in the south of Sweden. So this amount of snow, 3 decimeters, something like that. And we heard also stories that we were reading about on the phone, that people had been traveling in their cars. They'd been spending the Easter vacation somewhere, and they were going back to their permanent home, and they were stuck in the car. They had to spend the night in the car. So this is, I think, something which is also part of what I call the new normal, or many people call the new normal, that we
Yeah, I'll translate a little bit. Ci racconta che in effetti fa il riferimento al suo paese e dice che questa cosa di cui parlavamo non succede solo in Italia, anzi anche in Svezia, al sud, quando loro sono partiti per arrivare in Italia, faceva non particolarmente caldo, però si iniziava a percepire il passaggio alla primavera, mentre solo pochi giorni dopo è arrivata addirittura la neve di svariati centimetri che ha caratterizzato quella stessa area del paese, così come raccontava l'esempio di chi andando in vacanza trova una temperatura, poi si sposta e magari rimane addirittura bloccato per degli eventi meteorologici estremi. Quindi in primis non è una caratteristica soltanto del nostro paese, ma anche di altri. Cerchiamo di capire da che cosa deriva. Please.
Follow up on your question about if this is something that we can expect also in the future, I think it is. Because it's probably become more and more of fluctuations of extreme events, and the extreme events of rainfall and temperature variations from one month to another. And we've heard many stories here from both here in Padua and when we visited Venice a couple of days ago, that the situation here today is not what people expect. And also last November was very different from what people were expecting. So yes, I think it will be there will be a continuation of this kind of extreme events. And the main, probably you know it, but let me just repeat it, that the main reason, the main driver, the main cause of this change is the emission of greenhouse gases. The burning of fossil fuels, especially then carbon dioxide, but also methane. Methane, that's another name for it also, I don't know in English, which is related to, for instance, the cultivation of paddy rice. Then you get this gas going up into the air. And with that, those gases act like a kind of blanket or cover which prevents the heat from going back into the atmosphere. So, and this, the carbon dioxide, which in the atmosphere, it will not go away. It will be there for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. So that's why we can expect this kind of weather fluctuation to remain in the future.
Dice che questi cambiamenti meteorologici particolarmente accentuati sono effettivamente, li chiama la nuova normalità, sono un qualcosa che dobbiamo continuare ad aspettarci in futuro. Viaggiava anche a Venezia qualche giorno fa e gli dicevano che effettivamente il meteo non è quello che ci si potrebbe aspettare in questo periodo. Lui ci ha brevemente spiegato una cosa che ormai è ampiamente nota, ovvero il fatto che dipende dalle emissioni di CO2 e di gas più in generale climalteranti questa condizione, perché questi gas fanno quella che lui chiama una specie di coperta sopra le nostre teste, fanno sì che il caldo non possa superarla e quindi andare più in alto. Adesso provo a chiedergli se tutto sommato non ci sono sempre stati questi cambiamenti nel clima, perché qualcuno ci racconta che tutto sommato il clima è sempre stato ballerino, e allora che cosa cambia effettivamente oggi? I was adding just one more question into this kind of theme. Someone says that climate changes have always been true, they've always been real, our climate has always changed. What is different today from what was real back then, like 50, 30, 20 years ago?
Yes, that's very true, that climate has also changed, but it's the climate variation. The difference between the previous situation and today is the emission of gases. So that is the difference. But there's another thing, maybe we'll come back to that, but let me just mention it. The other thing is that the landscape looks very different.
Okay. Yes.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Also for Italians, only for Swedes. No, anyway, so this is different. Yes, the effect, the consequences of climate change, in terms of, I used to say that climate change is also water change, because the climate change will change the precipitation pattern, or both in terms of rainfall and snowfall. And once the precipitation, once the rainfall hits the ground, the landscape looks different today as it did compared to 100 years ago. Because both in Europe as well as in Asia, in Africa, in all parts of the world, people have cut down the forests. And that means that when the rainfall comes into the ground, it will just flush through. So if you look upon the situation 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the rainfall, when it hit the ground, it went down into the ground because there was another type of local situation, so to speak. That is different today. So the effect of climate change or global warming has to be looked into also together with the change in land use. And that is very, very, very different.
Ok, ci racconta che fondamentalmente è vero che il clima è sempre cambiato e questo era vero anche 100 anni fa. Quello che in questo momento però è realmente diverso è il fatto che il clima cambia molto più rapidamente di una volta. Dice che i cambiamenti climatici sono in qualche modo il cambiamento dell'acqua, associa le due cose perché quello che cambia principalmente sono le precipitazioni, delle precipitazioni che sono diverse perché il nostro terreno che le accoglie è diverso. Negli anni abbiamo tagliato moltissime foreste e questo fa sì che quando l'acqua cade in qualche modo piomba sul terreno e lo inonda, mentre una volta veniva assorbito dal terreno su cui cadeva. Please.
I think there's one thing more that is important to think about, and that is how we humans think about climate change. I've written about that in the book. There's one meteorologist in Sweden. He said that the human memory about extreme events is about 3 days. So after, if we have a heavy rainfall, after 3 days the sun will come back. People have forgotten about the bad event. So our human perception about the changing climate is very short-sighted. And also we talked about that before, Gaia and Antonio and myself upstairs, that the media, if you read the daily newspapers, there are different types of stories in the newspapers. So if an ordinary person reads the newspaper, he or she can find different types of explanations. So I think it's for many people it's a bit confusing. Because if you go out into Padua today, it's very nice weather, you don't realize that you are facing a climate change if you go out into Padua today. But maybe, I mean, when you have a heavy downpour, then you think maybe there is a change in the climate. So there's a difference here also, you know.
The perception.
Sì.
La differenza non sta soltanto in come il clima cambia, ma nella percezione che noi abbiamo di questo cambiamento. Nel libro è citata una frase che dice che la memoria degli uomini sugli eventi estremi è di 3 giorni. Questo ci fa capire che se 3 giorni dopo un'alluvione splende il sole, fondamentalmente ci siamo già dimenticati dell'alluvione. In più i giornali non aiutano perché raccontano storie, riportano pareri diversi che da una parte dicono sì, i cambiamenti climatici esistono, dall'altra no, e questo fa sì che fondamentalmente... grazie, thank you very much. Questo fa sì che il pubblico fondamentalmente sia confuso e non sappia più a cosa rivolgersi.
So I continue with that question?
If you want, but I have other questions.
Maybe yes, you can.
Okay.
Okay.
We're talking about the value of water. And it is fundamental for us, surviving on the planet, but we do not really much have consciousness on this and know where to find it. For example, we only think of water as the one in our seas or rivers, but you distinguish between blue and green water. I'll translate it and then let you answer the question. Dicevamo che l'acqua è fondamentale ed è in qualche modo la base della nostra sopravvivenza, ma non sappiamo mai nemmeno precisamente dove si trova. Se pensiamo all'acqua pensiamo a quella dei mari o dei fiumi o degli oceani, e invece lui parla di due tipi di acque, l'acqua azzurra e l'acqua verde. Che cosa sono questi due tipi di acqua e quindi dove si trova effettivamente intorno a noi?
Yes, about I think most people, let me first say that the amount of water on Earth is the same today as in previous historical periods. We have the same amount of water in the world today as in year 2000, year 1800, at the birth of Jesus Christ. It's the same amount of water. And the amount of water on Earth is circulating all the time through what we call the hydrological cycle. And the hydrological cycle is the rainfall. That's one part. And the rivers, the water flowing in the rivers, that's one part. The water in the lakes, Lago Maggiore, Lago di Garda, that's one part. And this water in the rivers and in the lakes, we call the blue water. Because the blue water is the water that is blue on the maps. That's a simple connotation. Now there's another part which is very, very important, especially for the farmers, and that is the soil moisture. That is the water that you don't see. That's the water in the root zone, below the ground, and that's where the vegetation sucks up the water, the moisture, and then from there it goes through the corn, the rice, the different crops, and go back to atmosphere as transpiration. Now we said that part, the soil moisture, is the green water. But most of my colleagues, most of the hydrologists, most of the water researchers, they pay most of the attention to the blue water, the water in the rivers, the water in lakes, because that is the water we can sell, we can buy it. That's the water that we drink. That's the water we have for our industry. That's the water that our animals drink, and so on. So that is the most attention is paid to the blue water. But the green water is the essential water for the vegetation. If there's a drought, if there's a lack of rainfall, then there will be lack of green water also. And if I've been working with the FAO in Rome, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Rome, based in Rome, and they have traditionally, and many of our colleagues, they have paid most attention to the blue water. Now we say that for farmers in Africa, for instance, for farmers here in Asia, also in Latin America, and also farmers in Italy and Sweden, they depend on the green water. But most of the investments, most of the attention is paid to the other part of the hydrological cycle. So it is important that we pay attention both to the blue water, because it's the blue water that we can use to withdraw water from the rivers, from the lakes, and for irrigation. That's the blue water. And if there's a drought period, farmers have to, if there's not enough water in the ground, they have to use water from the lakes or from reservoirs, from small impoundments.
Perfetto, controlla. Allora, fondamentalmente ci racconta che la quantità di acqua che abbiamo sul nostro pianeta in realtà è sempre la stessa, così come il ciclo dell'acqua è sempre lo stesso. Solo che ci sono per l'appunto due tipi di acqua, quella azzurra e quella verde. L'acqua azzurra appunto è quella che vediamo sulla mappa banalmente, per cui il lago, il fiume, il mare, ed è quella a cui di solito viene prestata maggiore attenzione anche dagli studiosi del settore, perché è quella che si utilizza in maniera più facile soprattutto da noi consumatori, è quella in cui ci bagniamo, che preleviamo, che beviamo, mentre l'acqua verde è un'acqua che per noi è invisibile perché è l'acqua che è nel terreno, ad esempio, nella vegetazione, ed è l'acqua che poi evaporando rientra nell'atmosfera. Nessuno ci fa caso, ma in realtà anche quell'acqua conta, soprattutto perché gli agricoltori lavorano principalmente con quell'acqua, e se quella viene meno, ed è tendenzialmente la prima a venir meno nei periodi di siccità, allora in quel caso bisogna iniziare a prelevare l'acqua blu dai fiumi e dai laghi, con delle conseguenze che però a quel punto diventano un circolo vizioso.
I think this in Italy, you had a discussion here in Italy 1 or 2 years ago when you had a big drought here in the Po River Valley. I know that the farmers, they were suffering quite a lot because they had problem with the crops. And then there were, I don't know the details, you know it maybe much more than I do, of course, here. But there was a discussion among the farmers or farmers' organizations here in Italy. They wanted to capture the rainfall locally around the village or around the local areas, and this is what we call rainwater harvesting. And they wanted to collect that rainfall and put it into small ponds, small reservoirs. So instead of letting the water from the rainfall flowing out into the Po River, they wanted to keep the water locally for their own use. Now that is very interesting, because if you do that on a large scale, it will mean that, and if they use the water for the fields, that means that the water will go this way. So they capture the rainfall locally, they store it in different types of ponds, different reservoirs, and that means that the amount of water that flows into the river will be reduced. So that means the downstream areas, close to the estuary in Ponte, I don't remember the name now, but for people in downstream areas, they will have relatively less water, because the farmers will be capturing the water in sight, and that means that it's a kind of communicating vessels. So, but that means that you could also increase the green water locally. But it would mean that the blue water coming into the river would be reduced. So this is a balancing kind of challenge.
It shows how the two things are related.
Exactly.
Yeah, ok. Raccontava del caso della siccità del Po che c'è stata due anni fa, ed è nata una discussione fra agricoltori che si chiedevano se non fosse il caso per loro di raccogliere l'acqua piovana e far sì che non andasse ad alimentare il Po, ma piuttosto venisse da loro raccolta per il loro uso. Da un lato questo significa che quell'acqua in qualche modo diventava l'acqua verde, quindi quella che poi entra nel suolo e torna nell'atmosfera. Dall'altro lato però inevitabilmente, quindi bene da questo punto di vista, ma dall'altro lato si riduce la portata del fiume, perché si fa sì che l'acqua piovana non lo vada ad alimentare, e quindi tutte quelle coltivazioni, popolazioni, insomma attività che insistono poi lungo i bordi del fiume e che si giovano di quell'acqua andando avanti nel percorso non ne avrebbero avuta. Cita questo esempio perché mostra la diretta correlazione fra l'acqua verde e l'acqua blu e come si debba mantenere sempre un equilibrio fra le due, non si possa prestare attenzione solo all'una e non all'altra.
So I think this is the situation in Italy, but we have in Sweden, Sweden is a very water-rich country. But also in Sweden, we now feel the consequences of climate change or global warming. So in 2018, that's 5-6 years ago, then we had the summer in Sweden in 2018. Well, for about 3 weeks, we had a tropical climate in Sweden. So for people who are not farmers, they could go swimming every day. You could sit out in the country, on the balcony late evening, in very nice weather. It was never below 20 degrees zero, all night. But it meant also that the amount of water, the use of water went up, because people wanted more showers. They had to use water for crops, for gardens, such things. Our lawn on the west coast, it was very green at the beginning of summer, then it became brown. So instead of a lawn, we had a hay carpet, we used to say. Now, it also meant that the amount of water that went into the ground to fill the groundwater was also reduced. So in Sweden in 2018, the groundwater level went down, down, down. Huh? It means that you needed more energy to pump the water, because it was a bigger depth. So I think that also in a country like Sweden, which is comparatively a very water-rich country compared to both to Italy, but compared to Africa, of course, and Middle East, we also face these kind of fluctuations. And last summer was very hot at the beginning of June, part of July in Sweden, also tropical period. But then the sky opened, and it was heavy downpours which destroyed the crops, not because of lack of water, but because of too much water.
Di nuovo fa l'esempio della Svezia, dicendo che effettivamente anche in Svezia ci sono i cambiamenti climatici, ovviamente, nonostante sia un paese tendenzialmente ricco di acqua. Eppure racconta il caso del 2018 in cui ci sono state 3 settimane di clima tropicale, una cosa che in Svezia ovviamente non è normale. Le persone non erano abituate e sono state anche contente di vivere al caldo con un clima che dice non scendeva sotto i 20 gradi, che per loro è moltissimo, anche se noi siamo abituati a qualcosa in più. Però questo ha significato anche, da un lato, che si è usata più acqua, dall'altro che l'acqua nel terreno è retrocessa, perché il terreno si è asciugato sempre di più, e che quindi è servita più energia per tirarla fuori, perché doveva fare un percorso più ampio. E oltretutto, come siamo abituati a vedere, questo ha significato anche che poi per le settimane successive invece si è aperto il cielo ed è caduta giù una quantità di pioggia che ha distrutto tutte le coltivazioni che magari avevano anche beneficiato del buon tempo precedente.
Yes, maybe. I mean, you mentioned before here, Gaia, that the one has to look upon the combination of different factors. That when the climate change, when the temperature change, the water change, when we change the land use, the circulation of water in the landscape will change and such. But I think it is important to also recognize that these changes, they are felt most severely by the farmers, because it's the farmers, the agricultural areas, that are most heavily affected by change in climate. For industry, for urban areas, the water is used we can reuse the water. So when the industry is using the water in the processing part of the industrial activities, they can clean it and they can reuse it. Many industries have this kind of recirculation, reuse. You can't do that in agriculture. And the agriculture water use is seasonal. I mean, we need it for, I don't know here in Italy, but in Sweden we need the water from sometimes spring over the summer. Then we don't want any more water to have a good crop. So there's always this seasonal problem in agriculture. And agriculture, the water use will go back to atmosphere. And if you look upon it globally, I don't have the figures for Italy, but the volume of water, the percentage of water used in agriculture is about 80% globally. So the industrial water use is much, much smaller. household water use for drinking, for animals to drink, and those kind of water uses are much smaller. So agriculture is the main water using sector.
Yeah, we can say that companies in this type of condition were stimulated to create new solutions to reuse water and so become more sustainable also.
Yes.
So that could be a good outcome eventually. Dice che dobbiamo stare attenti a considerare il fatto che noi magari notiamo la mancanza di acqua oppure l'alluvione, la siccità, ma in realtà chi ne risente poi direttamente di più inevitabilmente è l'agricoltura, che a livello mondiale è l'80% dell'utilizzo della nostra acqua, anche perché le industrie, quello che dicevamo è che tendenzialmente le imprese se diventano se sviluppano nuove soluzioni e avanzano tecnologicamente possono imparare a riutilizzare l'acqua che gli serve per i processi, e quindi questo sarebbe anche una buona deriva della situazione lato imprese. L'agricoltura non può riusare l'acqua e oltretutto ha bisogno di avere stabilità nell'arco delle stagioni, perché ha stagioni in cui necessita di più acqua e stagioni in cui invece non ne vuole assolutamente, per cui dei cambiamenti di questo genere scombinano completamente la capacità di produrre. Something that I wanted to ask, if I may, you've said that the quantity of water is always the same over time. So why are we now talking about water not being enough for the population? Yes, the population is growing over time, so we would need probably more water, but are we also wasting some of it? La domanda è: se dice che l'acqua che abbiamo oggi è la stessa acqua che avevamo un tempo, perché ce ne manca, perché parliamo di scarsità d'acqua? Da un lato certamente perché la popolazione cresce e quindi crescendo la popolazione servirà più acqua, ma ne stiamo anche sprecando una percentuale e quindi ne abbiamo una percentuale da riguadagnare?
Yes, that's a very important question, of course. And I think that, yes, the amount of water, and then I'm talking, you know, we have a fresh water that we can drink, that we can use for industry, such things. And then we have the oceans, the salt water, the brackish water. Now, I think that for us and for society, the most important is the fresh water, not the salt water. The salt water is important, of course, for fish, there's a lot of, we need the oceans for many different things. But it's the fresh water which is important for most of the activities in society. Now, the water crisis is, I think, a combination of different things. One is that the erraticness in the precipitation. The rainfall pattern is now much more uncertain. So today we are very uncertain about when the rainy season will start and for how long time it will last. And that means that there could be a scarcity of water due to the increasing erraticness in precipitation. And when there is a heavy rainfall, a torrential rainfall, it becomes very difficult to catch the water. So, for instance, in one extreme example, but it happens all the time, but maybe on a smaller scale, but in a country like Pakistan, you know, in 2018, 2019, as a result of very heavy rainfall, 1/3 of the country was underwater, 1/3. And there was no way for the water to escape. The rivers were not enough to bring the water out into the sea. So it means that the crops were destroyed, you could not travel, bridges were destroyed, all those kind of things. So the variation in itself means that for part of the year there is a shortage of water, and for part of the year there's too much water. But then, as you mentioned, also population is very important, I think. So if we take one In Italy, Sweden, we have a very low fertility rate. The number of people in Italy is not increasing very much. I think it's, if you would not have immigration, it would be being reduced. Same with Sweden. In Africa, it's not like that. The number of children per woman in Africa as a whole is about 4.5 to 5 children per woman. In Italy, it's 1.3, as far as I have read. Sweden is 1.5. And to keep the population steady, it should be 2.1. So the increase in the population is very rapid in countries, in parts of the world where the water problem is already serious. So my wife, Anna, and myself, we went to Tanzania in 1970, many years ago. At that time, the population in Tanzania was about, I think, 12 million. I'm not quite sure about the figure. I think 12 million. And today, about 50 years later, it's 65 million. So from 12 to 65. The population in Dar es Salaam, the capital, at that time was 320,000. And today it's over 6 million. But they have the same amount of water. So that means that the amount of water per capita is going down. And besides the relation between people and water, you also have this climate change. So it becomes much more difficult to capture the water and make beneficial use of the water. And you have to share the water between many, many more people.
Allora, in primis è vero che c'è un tema di popolazione in crescita, devi spartire la stessa quantità d'acqua per una popolazione che però è sempre in numero maggiore. Dopodiché la popolazione cresce, ma non cresce in maniera omogenea. In Italia, ad esempio, la demografia segue una curva assolutamente drammatica in discesa, mentre è un paese come l'Africa a crescere particolarmente di popolazione, che già soffre di problemi con l'acqua, di scarsità d'acqua, per cui anche questa distribuzione geografica inevitabilmente non semplifica la gestione. In più ci si mettono i cambiamenti climatici che mostrano una variazione molto veloce di precipitazioni e periodi invece di scarsità, e che quindi rendono ancora più difficile la gestione della risorsa. There's also a correlation between water and food. The subtitle of the book enlightens this correlation between water, food and the growth of population. What's the relation? Cosa c'entra invece il cibo, che è citato nel sottotitolo del libro, con il tema della gestione dell'acqua?
Yes, this is an important part of the book because as I mentioned before, also here that if you look upon the water use in different sectors, agriculture for food, but agriculture also produces fiber, cotton, for instance, different types of other commodities. But water for agriculture and water for industry, water for households, these are the main three sectors. Now, the amount of food to agriculture means also that the amount of water that we are eating is much more than the amount of water that we are drinking. So if you calculate the amount of water that is required to produce the food for one person per day, for Italy and Sweden it would probably be around 3 or 4 cubic meters of water. So for our meal, if we have a pizza or a hamburger, it could be different, but the amount of water that is required to produce the food is very high. Per day, yes, per day. So compared to if you're drinking, I mean, we don't drink more than 2 or 3 liters. And the industrial goods that we're using, even if you look upon cars and other things, the amount of water that is required to produce the industrial goods, it's much less as compared to the amount of water that is required to produce the food. And the food that is most water intensive is the animal type of food, red meat in particular. So for one, I have those figures. You have probably heard them, maybe, but for 1 kilo of red meat, beef, it requires roughly about 15 tons of water, 1 kilo. That means that if you have a hamburger of 100 grams, it's quite a lot of water that has been required to feed the animals, because there's not the water that the cows drink, but it's the water that is used to produce the feed, the crops, the different types of fodder. And you know, it takes a long time to produce 1 kilo of meat, to 1 liter of milk. So if you take the amount of water that is required to produce the feed, the grass, and the cereals, maize, for instance, here in Italy, there's a huge amount of water required. And in addition, it could also be mentioned, in addition, we use a large amount of land. So if you look on agriculture, we have some part of the land is used for crops that we can eat directly, barley, different crops. And then we use a large part of the land to produce fodder, feed for the cattle. So food is very, very resource intensive. And we tend not to realize that often.
Di solito non ci accorgiamo del fatto che il cibo in realtà utilizza moltissime risorse per essere prodotto, ma è un tema importante nel momento in cui parliamo di acqua, perché l'agricoltura dedita proprio alla produzione di cibo e non ad esempio alla produzione di cotone, che può essere un'alternativa, è quella che richiede l'uso di più acqua. Faceva qualche numero, ogni giorno per alimentare una persona servono circa 3 o 4 metri quadri di acqua per produrre quello che poi una persona mangia in un giorno. Questo significa che tendenzialmente è di più l'acqua che mangiamo che non quella che effettivamente beviamo. L'industria ne usa meno, invece a usarne di più è in particolare l'allevamento per la carne rossa. Addirittura per produrne 1 chilo servono circa 15 tonnellate di acqua, e quindi questo, facendo una veloce equazione su quanta carne di solito mangiamo in un pasto e quanta acqua serve, è effettivamente tantissima, senza citare il fatto che ovviamente l'agricoltura utilizza anche molta terra. So food is an important part of our usage, total usage of water, and we should be then careful about on how we produce food, but also maybe on how much food we waste, right?
I think so, yes. I mean, it makes sense both from a water point of view, but also from an economic point of view, because the food that we are wasting, it's also a waste of money, it's a waste of water, it's a waste of energy, it's a waste of land use. And I think it's also interesting to mention that if you look upon the food that is production, and then we have the food processing industry like Barilla, Nestle, and many other food companies, they use some water, but not so much. Huh? And then we have the households who prepare the food, use the water for cooking different vegetables, potatoes, such things. But the amount of water that the farmers are using for the food is much higher as compared to the food industry. So Barilla here outside Parma, they're not using much water. The households, they are not using much water to prepare the food. But if we look on the energy use, the amount of energy that is used for farmers when they have the tractors, different harvesters, those kind of equipment. And then you compare the energy that is used in industry and the energy that is used in the household for cooking, for refrigeration, for such things. The amount of energy is much higher among the consumers as compared to the farmers. So we have the opposite situation. For farmers, they are the heavy water users, and then there's less water use in the industry and in the consumers. For energy, it's the opposite. So we as consumers are the big users in terms of the total energy used in the food system. And that means if we are buying food, then and if we are storing the food at home in the fridge, then we are cooking it, and then we are throwing it away. That means that we are throwing away both the water, the energy, and the money. So waste is not a sensible option.
Faceva riferimento al fatto che sprechiamo molto del nostro cibo, dopodiché stiamo toccando tutti questi temi velocemente, ma nel libro sono trattati con dovizia di particolari e approccio e metodo scientifico. Ovviamente semplifichiamo per la discussione. Il tema dello spreco di cibo è un tema reale non solo per il cibo in sé, ma per tutta l'acqua che è stata utilizzata per produrlo, oltre che per l'energia che ha richiesto. Se l'acqua viene utilizzata soprattutto dagli agricoltori e molto meno invece dalle industrie di lavorazione, chi ne usa di più è l'agricoltore proprio che coltiva appunto quel cibo, in realtà sull'energia il rapporto è completamente diverso. Siamo noi consumatori finali praticamente, o le industrie di produzione, di lavorazione anzi, a consumare molta più energia di quanta non ne utilizzi l'agricoltore. Comunque dobbiamo tenere assieme questi tre elementi: cibo in sé come risorsa, acqua ed energia per produrlo, per far sì che non vengano sprecati e quindi noi consumatori stessi sviluppare una maggior consapevolezza di questo tema. You wanted to add something? Because I would like to ask if someone has questions, maybe. Se avete qualche curiosità, proprio perché abbiamo toccato i temi giusto in maniera spot, diciamo per lanciarli, se avete qualche curiosità specifica o tema da tirare fuori è il momento giusto, altrimenti ci prendiamo altri 5 minuti di chiusura. Dite voi. Non particolari domande. Andiamo avanti. Let's just finish in some minutes. You highlighted the role of the customer and the responsibility of the customer, of the citizen. We said that our memory on emergencies is very not really stable. We lose it very fast. What are your recommendations? How can we be more responsible towards this kind of themes?
It's one of those $1,000 questions, because it's very complex. I'm sorry, but these are very complex issues. Of course, as you mentioned before, these are interwoven. There's a connection between different parts, between our activities, the climate, and political aspects, all those kinds of. But I think and the food habits are very much connected to our culture. So it takes time. I think it takes time for people to change food habits. But I think it makes a lot of sense to try to improve the awareness about the environmental, the natural resources implications of food, and also the economic aspect. Because if we are buying more food than we need and we need to eat, then we are also throwing away the money that we spend on food. And there are different calculations about how much money we spend on food, and it depends, it varies from one country to another, but on average about 35% of the food that is bought in shops, in the market, is either wasted or it's lost somehow. That means also that 35% of the expenses, if you spend €100 on food and you throw away part of it, it means also that you could have that money to buy other things. So it makes sense to have a consciousness about but the problem is that these are things that happen every day, yeah? And for every day you don't lose more than maybe 50 cents or something like that. But if you calculate 50 cents over 1 year, 360 days, it is about €180. So that is one thing, but also I think the other practical matters. It's difficult to plan your purchases so that you buy just enough, because we want to buy enough to have some choices, some options. So changing food habits is very difficult. In Sweden, I think there's an attempt, for instance, to include these kind of issues in the school curriculum, to make the young generation more conscious about both food but also climate. You know, Greta Thunberg, you probably have heard her. So they say, I think among the young generation and also among the educated people, there's clear awareness about these things. But then on the other hand, we have more money in our pockets. We are rich, many of us are rich, so we can afford to buy a lot of things. We can afford to waste, and it's how do you deal with that? It's a very tricky political question.
Well, you have to have a long-term view.
Exactly, yes, I think so. It takes time.
Fondamentalmente dice che per capire l'impatto di questi problemi e quanto possano impattare anche noi stessi come consumatori, anche dal punto di vista economico, oltre che etico, ambientale, le cose vanno sempre assieme, bisogna avere inevitabilmente una visione di lungo raggio, perché se guardiamo sul breve termine probabilmente è minimo l'impatto che giorno dopo giorno possiamo riscontrare. Se però lo guardiamo a distanza di anni ci rendiamo conto che effettivamente anche gesti piccoli fanno la differenza. Dopodiché ammette che tutto quello che è legato alle abitudini sul cibo, ad esempio, sono molto culturali. In Italia è difficile scardinarne alcune e soprattutto è difficile avere consapevolezza di quando si sta comprando la cosa giusta o la quantità giusta di cibo. Tendiamo a farlo in maniera leggera e meno pianificata. Però già soltanto avere consapevolezza di questi temi aiuta. In Svezia si sta provando ad inserire addirittura a scuola nell'istruzione la cognizione di questi aspetti. Si parla di cambiamenti climatici, si parla di cibo, di gestione dell'acqua. Il fatto che appunto esistano questi studi sull'acqua anche all'università è, non so se in Italia ce ne sono di simili, non credo di averne sentiti. I was saying that in Italy we don't have water studies at universities, for example. I don't think so, at least, and that's an interesting fact. Quindi dicevo, questi sono gli aspetti fondamentali, li abbiamo toccati in maniera spot, in realtà nel libro si leggono con molto più approfondimento e quindi l'invito è di continuare ad approfondirli con la lettura. I was just saying that we just mentioned some of the themes like randomly even at some points, but they are very detailed in the book, and so we invite everybody to go and check them out in the book to understand how they are intertwined one with the other and have a more precise idea on the topics. So the invite is to read the book, but thank you very much for letting us open a window on such an interesting and also like ordinary theme that we see every day in our daily life but never conceptualize and think long term. So thank you very much, Jan Lundqvist, and thank you for being here with us today. Grazie per averci ascoltati. Lui resta qui per eventuali altre curiosità vi venissero in mente dopo, se no c'è il libro che prova a rispondere. Grazie.
Thank you very much, Gaia. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Italy Post staff, who have been extremely helpful and kind, nice, and we love Italy as much as we love water. Thank you. Thank you very much.